listener production.
She's giving Sydney some of the black magic, and look at her go, Black Caviar. She raced away. She's going to set a new Group 1 record in Australia. She's truly in a league of her own. Black Caviar racing away from Epaulet. Black Caviar doesn't let us down.
Hey, Bension Siebert here with you for the briefing. And that was one of Australian champion racehorse Black Caviar's many wins. Considered the world's best sprinter, she clocked up 25 wins for 25 starts over a career spanning from 2009 to 2013. She was one of the greatest racehorses of all time before her retirement and was euthanised after a short illness over the weekend. Many people might assume that after such an enormously successful career, a horse like Black Caviar might retire to a life of eating grass in some picturesque valley, receiving many little treats. But Black Caviar died over the weekend reportedly just hours after giving birth to her 9th foal. And her death has sparked a new conversation questioning the ethics of forcing retired racehorses to pretty much constantly be pregnant and giving birth until their death. Walkley award-winning author and investigative journalist Lucie Morris-Marr actually met Black Caviar during her retirement. Lucie, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing. We'll talk about Black Caviar in a moment, but for many of us not familiar with the horse racing industry, what actually happens to racehorses in general after they've finished racing?
Well, this is a point of controversy, of course, because the more successful a racehorse is on the track, how many wins they get, especially if they're well regarded, like Black Caviar and all these amazing horses, their value as a breeding horse, whether it's a stallion or a mare, is immense. And, you know, if they have many foals, those foals could do well. Those foals could be sold at the yearling sales, or they could be kept by the owners. So basically, the future for a successful racehorse is on a stud in Australia, and there's many of these studs. Many of them are concentrated around New South Wales and elsewhere. Others, unfortunately, the Four Corners ABC report did do a report a couple of years ago about how many racehorses, there is wastage, as it's called. If they're not successful, they are euthanized in an abattoir, etc. So that there's a bit of controversy of the future of racehorses once they finish their careers.
Black Caviar, who died over the weekend, was considered the world's best sprinter until her retirement in 2013. You actually went to visit her during that retirement. Can you tell us what you learned there?
Yes, I was invited. It was a rare visit, so it was, I was quite excited to suddenly get this invitation. I was a feature writer for an Australian tabloid, the Herald Sun in Melbourne at that time, and I wasn't a sports reporter. I didn't know a lot about horse racing or breeding, but sometimes going in with naive and fresh eyes is handy in journalism because you ask impertinent questions and see things with a new perspective. And so on the face of it, when I arrived, Black Caviar was there in the paddock with her 2nd foal. It was all beautiful. Everything looked well kept, she looked well cared for, if a little weary, if I'm honest. I do have a photograph of her, and a lot of people on my Twitter feed said she felt she looked a little weary at that point. She'd been breeding then for a couple of years, and that was going to be her life. And she seemed fine, but when I spoke to the stud manager and I said, please talk me through the process of how it all works, I know nothing. And he started to tell me. And he said, during the moment of impregnation, where it was a live couple, which that means you actually have a stallion, it's not artificial insemination. There's a stallion in the stable, brought in, often a very, very well successful stallion as well, with an amazing career history, of course, because they want to breed well. They said they used, to keep her calm, a device twisted on her face. I think it's around the lip, called a twitch device, was if she protested or moved or kicked, they would twist that and it would make her stop. It was a restraint. And that sort of made me sit up and go, oh, that sounds painful. I just felt a bit uncomfortable about that. This is a normal practice in the racing industry, but obviously as an outsider, it was something I hadn't heard about. And it was just something that really didn't sit well with me for ever since.
Thoroughbred Breeders New South Wales President Hamish Esplin says that criticism of Black Caviar's treatment is misplaced. He says that big money was spent keeping her fit and healthy in retirement, and that her owners provided the best of care, including in the lead up to her death. In your view, what more could they have done?
Well, look, from what I saw, it was a beautiful stud. There were professionals, there was lots of staff, lots of young people, and then experienced managers who I thought were great. I didn't have any concern, and I still don't, on the general care. You know, there were vets on call. It was a very wealthy stables with lots of famous horses. I think he's correct in what he's saying, but I just think on an overview, the question needs to be asked, was it fair for Black Caviar to be made? She didn't have a choice to have 9 foals. And not everyone realises that the gestation of each foal is 340 days. It's nearly an entire year. She had 9 foals over the space of 11 years. So she was almost constantly pregnant. And then in the end, she died of a really severe foot disease. The question is, was this brought on by the sheer weight and scale of the succession of pregnancies that she was forced to go through? Is 9 a little bit excessive? Some people on Twitter are using the words greedy, and I think it's a fair question. This horse is part of our history. It's adored by millions of people. It's a national treasure who worked really hard to entertain, made people a lot of millions of money, punters and their owners. And I just think we all have a stake in really actually what happened. This is a sort of unusual situation, but she's part of Australia in a way, and we all love that horse. And I just feel that her death has actually brought up some very troubling questions about the breeding process, about how many foals a mare can and should have.
It's difficult, also myself speaking out as someone who doesn't know very much about the racing industry, to be able to judge what counts as cruel in that kind of context. Do you know, for example, what life is like for like a Brumby in the wild by comparison? Is 9 foals something completely out of the realms of what a wild horse would experience?
Yeah, exactly. Some people on Twitter have made that, on X platform, have made that point and said if she had been in the wild, she would have had 1 foal every year. That's a fair point. It's just, I suppose, she already was pushed to her limits as a racing horse, unlike the Brumbies. She already went through a lot physically, and it's not quite the same. This isn't a natural wild situation. This is a false situation. And the reason she's being bred is for one reason, and that's for monetary gain. Those foals are so valuable. Even 2 of them I looked into have already been retired to stud. They weren't winners. They may have won a couple of races. They're already breeding. Black Caviar was a grandma when she died. Even her offspring right down the line are going to be valuable just because they were related to her. So it's an irresistible thing, isn't it, to have a horse which can create foals, which can create income, which goes on and on and on, either as breeders or as possible runners. And that's why she was being bred. And I think that's the question that people are upset about. They're like, could they not have just given her a little bit of a break, or maybe a year or 2 off between foals, you know? And so, yeah, look, my job is just to raise the questions. I was there, I went to visit her, and even then I had some concerns. And when I left, she'd only had 2 foals, and I thought, oh, maybe she'll only have a couple more. And I'd lost track of that story in her life until the weekend. And I was really troubled and shocked to hear that she'd had 9 by the time she died. And that's what worried me.
As you mentioned, there is a lot of difference between the perspective of people in the industry and people outside it. There's no doubt that there are people in the horse racing industry who love their horses and who vehemently disagree that there's any cruelty involved in the way that they're raced and bred. Is it fair for people outside looking in to make a judgment call about the cruelty?
100%. We're a society and we have views, and everyone's allowed to express their views. And of course, as I said, I came with it with fresh eyes, just as many people who are commenting might not know. And yeah, all we're saying is this correct? Asking questions, not we, everyone who's read my stories, who's made hundreds of comments on Twitter. And I just spoke the facts. I went there. This is what her lifestyle was like. Every time there was an impregnation from the stallion, she had to be restrained in what I feel is probably a painful way. People can argue about that. People twisting a tightrope round the mouth of a horse because she's getting a stallion mounting her. It's not a nice situation for that horse. And that's just normal standards of society. And I don't think you have to be a racing expert to actually make that conclusion.
Well, Lucie Morris-Marr, thanks so much for joining us today on The Briefing.
Thank you for asking me.
Lucie Morris-Marr there. That's it for this episode of The Briefing. We'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might be interested. And if you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow from 6 a.m. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you then.